When my son first brought his new wife into our home, I tried, truly tried, to welcome her with open arms. I had always dreamed of the day my son would find someone to love, someone who would stand beside him through the storms of life. I wanted to be that kind of mother-in-law who made things easier, not harder. I cooked for them, I cleaned, I even rearranged parts of the house so she could feel more comfortable, like it was her home too. But instead of gratitude, I felt this chill. She carried herself like a queen who had just claimed new territory, strutting around with that smug smile as if my decades of sacrifice meant nothing. First, I told myself I was being sensitive. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was just nerves on her part, adjusting to a new life, a new family. But little things kept piling up. She would walk into the kitchen while I was scrubbing pots and pans after cooking dinner for all of us, and without even looking at me, she'd toss her empty plate on the counter and stroll out. No, thank you. No offer to help, not even eye contact. Just dismissal. I shrugged it off. Thought, she's young. She'll learn. But then the whispers started. I overheard her on the phone with a friend one evening. I was sitting in the living room, mending one of my old cardigans, when I heard her laugh echo down the hallway. Honestly, she said, it's like having a built-in maid. She does everything. I don't even have to ask. Froze. The needle in my hand stopped mid-stitch, and my heart clenched. She wasn't joking. Her tone carried no affection, no respect. Just smug satisfaction. She saw me not as her husband's mother, not as a woman who had spent 40 years keeping this family together, but as free labor. As the maid. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every little slight, every ignored kindness, every moment she had brushed me aside like I was nothing. My chest felt heavy, and yet, beneath the weight of that pain, a spark was igniting. A spark of something I hadn't felt in years, anger. The next morning, I forced myself to go about my usual routine, though my hands trembled as I brewed the coffee and set the table. My son came down first, yawning, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. A few minutes later she walked in. His wife, with her perfectly straightened hair and that smug look plastered across her face. She didn't even glance at me. Just sat down, grabbed her cup, and started giving my son a list of things she wanted done around the house. Can you fix the faucet in the bathroom? And the garage light is flickering. Also, we should think about remodeling the living room. It looks dated. Her words were sharp, dismissive, and the worst part was the way she emphasized dated. Her eyes flicking briefly toward me as though I were part of that outdated furniture she wanted gone. I gripped the edge of the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. My son didn't notice. He just nodded, distracted, trying to please her. And me. I just stood there, silently pouring coffee, holding my tongue. But inside something was cracking. Later that afternoon, I went into my room and pulled out an old photo album. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to remind myself of who I was, of what I had built. There were pictures of me and my late husband, smiling in front of this very house when it was just ours. Pictures of my son as a baby, taking his first steps in the hallway, learning to ride a bike in the driveway, graduating in the backyard. This house wasn't just walls and bricks. It was my life's work, my sacrifice. And now, the girl who married into my family, without lifting a single finger to contribute, was calling me the maid. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I closed the album slowly, pressed it to my chest and whispered to myself, she has no idea who she's dealing with. Because here's the truth. I had been silent for too long. I had allowed my kindness to be mistaken for weakness. But I wasn't weak. I was the one who had kept this family afloat through every storm. I was the one who had worked double shifts, skipped meals, and held everything together when life tried to tear us apart. And if she wanted to see me as the maid, then fine. But soon she'd learn just how much power the so-called maid really had. A week later the breaking point came. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when sunlight spills through the curtains and the house feels alive with possibility. I had been up early, sweeping, doing laundry, preparing a big meal because my son had mentioned inviting a couple of his friends over. I wanted everything perfect the way I had always done. By the time the doorbell rang, the table was already set, and the smell of roasted chicken filled the air. My son's friends stepped inside, greeting me warmly. "Mrs. Thompson, this looks amazing," one of them said, his eyes widening at the spread on the dining table. For a moment I felt proud again. But then she appeared, my son's wife, dressed to impress in a tight dress and high heels, her makeup flawless. She gave them all a dazzling smile, as though she had orchestrated the entire afternoon. "Welcome everyone," she said sweetly, sweeping her arm toward the food. "I hope you enjoy what I prepared." My jaw nearly dropped. She didn't lift a finger. Not a single finger. I had done every bit of work, from the cooking to the cleaning to the decorating. And yet, she was standing there, claiming the glory, taking credit as if I were invisible. One of the guests raised a glass. "Well, thank you, it looks incredible." She smirked, glancing at me only briefly, her eyes filled with triumph, as though she'd won some silent battle I hadn't agreed to fight. My stomach twisted with fury, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to smile politely. Later that night, after everyone left, I heard her laughing again on the phone. She thought I couldn't hear her, but every word hit me like a dagger. "They all believed it," she whispered. "She cooked everything and I just stood there and smiled. Honestly, I don't know how she puts up with it. She's so pathetic. Like a maid who doesn't even realize she's being used." This time I didn't just feel hurt. I felt fire. My chest burned, my hands shook, and for the first time in years, I actually spoke out loud in an empty room. "Pathetic? You think I'm pathetic?" My voice cracked, but it carried something else too, resolve. I knew then I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my own home, dismissed and degraded. She wanted to see me as the maid. She wanted me invisible. Fame. But when I disappeared, she would learn exactly what that meant. The very next morning I decided to test something. Instead of waking up at the crack of dawn like I always did, I stayed in bed. No breakfast sizzling on the stove, no coffee brewing, no laundry humming in the background. I listened from my room as the silence filled the house like a heavy fog. Within an hour the chaos started. She stormed into the kitchen, opening cabinets, slamming drawers, complaining loud enough for me to hear. "Where's the coffee? Why hasn't anyone done the dishes? Why is this place such a mess?" My son shuffled around, confused and tired, offering weak excuses. "Maybe mom's resting." Resting. The word tasted strange on my tongue. When was the last time I had allowed myself to rest? To let someone else take responsibility? My lips curved into the faintest smile. Let them feel even a fraction of what I carried every single day. By noon she was furious. She stomped through the hallway, heels clicking like warning shots, and burst into my room without knocking. "What are you doing just lying there? The house is disgusting. You need to get up and clean." Her words sliced through the air, sharp and entitled. For a moment, I just stared at her, studying the impatience in her eyes, the way her hands were planted firmly on her hips as though she owned not only this house but me as well. Slowly, deliberately, I sat up and said, "I'm not the maid. Remember." Her face twisted, caught off guard, but she recovered quickly with a scoff. "You're right, you're worse than a maid. At least a maid gets paid." That was it. Final straw. I stood, my body trembling not from fear but from 40 years of pent-up rage and exhaustion. My voice came out low, steady, and deadly calm. "Then maybe it's time you find out what it's like to live without me." She blinked, confused, almost laughing, until I reached into my dresser and pulled out the small metal object that would change everything, the keys to the house. I held them up, the light catching on the silver, and her smirk faded. "You think I'm your servant," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "But this house, this home you take for granted, it exists because of me. Every brick, every payment, every sacrifice. And if you believe I'm nothing more than the maid, then you can have the keys." I pressed them into her palm, my hand firm, my gaze unwavering. Then I added, with a coldness that sent a visible shiver down her spine, "Good luck with the mortgage." The following morning, the house was unusually quiet. Maria had already left for work, rushing out without so much as a glance toward me. My son Daniel was distant too, caught between loyalty to his wife and respect for me. I could see the weight pressing down on him, and though it hurt, I didn't want him to suffer because of this rift. Later that afternoon Maria returned. Her face was pale, her eyes darkened with fatigue. She set her bag down and didn't say a word. For once, she didn't order me around. Instead, she walked past me and sat on the couch, her head buried in her hands. "You look tired," I said gently. She didn't reply at first. Then, in a voice that was barely audible, she muttered, "I didn't realize how much work this house needed. How much time everything takes." Her words lingered in the air. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was a crack in her armor. I could feel it, the first glimpse of understanding. For the next few days I stayed quiet. I let her experience what I had endured. From cooking meals to washing endless dishes, from scrubbing floors to folding laundry, Maria was confronted with reality. Every task chipped away at her pride, revealing the harsh truth she had ignored for so long. One evening, as I sipped tea in the kitchen, Maria walked in. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she leaned against the counter, her voice trembling. "I said something cruel to you, and I regret it," she whispered. "Calling you a maid. It was wrong." I looked at her, really looked. The arrogance was gone, replaced by exhaustion and humility. It was a moment I had prayed for but never expected to arrive so soon. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind her of the hurt she caused. Instead, I simply replied, "It takes strength to admit when we're wrong. Thank you for saying that." Her eyes watered, and for the first time since she married my son, she seemed human to me, vulnerable, flawed, and willing to learn. And in that moment, I knew the story was shifting. Not toward revenge, not toward bitterness, but perhaps toward understanding. The house slowly began to change. It wasn't the walls or the furniture. Those stayed the same, but the air felt different. There was less tension, less of that sharp hostility that used to sting every time Maria opened her mouth. Still, peace didn't arrive overnight. Old habits clung to her like shadows. Some days Maria would return to her old tone, curt, dismissive, quick to command. And yet, almost as quickly, I noticed the hesitation in her eyes afterward, as though guilt caught her tongue. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find her standing over the stove, staring blankly at a pan of burnt eggs. The acrid smell filled the air. She turned to me, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I've been trying to make breakfast, but everything keeps going wrong," she admitted, her voice unusually soft. I smiled gently, pulling up a chair. "Cooking isn't just about following steps. It's about patience. It's about love." She looked at me skeptically, but for once, she didn't argue. She handed me the spatula, and I showed her how to lower the flame, how to season with care, how to know when something was ready. Not because the clock said so, but because you felt it. That morning, she didn't just eat breakfast. She savored it. For the first time, she understood the quiet effort behind every simple meal she had taken for granted. Later that week, I overheard her speaking to Daniel. Her voice was low, but I caught every word. "I never realized how much your mother did. She worked silently every single day. And I thought it was nothing." Daniel didn't reply, but the relief in his eyes when he saw me standing nearby said enough. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't love either. But it was progress. And progress, I knew, was enough to begin rebuilding what had been shattered. As days passed, I noticed small but meaningful shifts in Maria's behavior. She started lingering in the kitchen when I cooked, not with her usual critical comments, but with quiet curiosity. Sometimes she'd ask questions, simple ones like why I added salt at a certain time, or how I could tell the dough was ready to bake. It was strange at first, seeing her try to bridge the gap between us. Part of me wanted to push her away, to remind her of the words she had once thrown at me like daggers. "You're just the maid." But another part of me, the part that had raised Daniel with patience and forgiveness, told me that healing was worth more than holding on to bitterness. One afternoon, I sat in the garden trimming the rose bushes. Maria stepped outside carrying 2 cups of tea. She hesitated for a moment before setting one beside me. "I thought maybe you'd like some," she murmured, her tone careful. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Thank you," I replied softly, taking a sip. It wasn't perfect, a little too bitter, but it was effort. And effort mattered. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then she spoke, almost as if the words were being dragged out of her. "I used to think you stood in the way of me and Daniel," she confessed. "I thought, if I pushed you aside, I'd have him all to myself. But now I see. You were the reason this house even stood together. You kept everything running. You gave us more than I ever realized." Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time I saw not arrogance but vulnerability. I looked at her, my heart softening against my will. "It's never too late to understand," I told her gently. "But respect has to be lived, not spoken. Show me, Maria. Not with words, with actions." She nodded, and for once, there was no defiance in her eyes. Only humility. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something had shifted forever. The keys I had once thrown onto the table in anger weren't just a symbol of burden anymore. They were a test. And slowly, Maria was beginning to understand the weight of what they truly meant. The following week brought an unexpected test of Maria's newfound resolve. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail, a notice from the bank. The mortgage payment was due, and it was much higher than she had expected. I found her sitting at the dining table, the paper trembling in her hands. Her face was pale, her confidence stripped away. "What is this?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Why is it so much?" I calmly took a seat across from her. "That," I said, tapping the letter, "is the reality of running a home. It's not just cooking and cleaning, Maria. It's bills, repairs, unexpected costs. You thought this place was built on my chores. Well, it's built on sacrifices you never saw." She blinked back tears, staring at the numbers as though they were some cruel riddle. I don't know how to handle this," she admitted, her voice breaking. For the first time I felt pity instead of anger. She wasn't just arrogant, she was naive, unprepared for the weight of adulthood. I leaned back in my chair and said, "When I gave you those keys, I wasn't just handing over a house. I was handing you the responsibility that comes with it. Do you see it now? Do you understand what you called me? The maid was so much more." She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Later that night, I overheard her speaking quietly to Daniel in the living room. "She was right," Maria confessed. "I treated her like she was nothing, but she was everything holding this house together. I don't know how she managed it all. I don't even know where to start." Daniel didn't respond immediately, but when he finally spoke, his voice carried both guilt and sorrow. "She's done more for us than we ever gave her credit for. Maybe this is the lesson we needed, Maria. Maybe this is how we learn to appreciate her." Hearing those words filled me with a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that at last, the truth was dawning on them. Sadness that it had taken so long and so much pain for them to see it. But for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't invisible anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the faint sounds of the house, the creak of pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft murmur of Daniel and Maria talking in hushed tones. For once, they weren't arguing about me. They were arguing about survival. By morning, Maria looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She sat across from me at breakfast, her pride stripped bare. "I can't do this alone," she admitted, her voice quiet but trembling. I thought keeping a home was just cooking dinner and vacuuming the floors. But this," she tapped the mortgage notice, "this is drowning me." For a moment, I simply sipped my coffee, letting her words hang in the air. She had finally reached the breaking point I knew would come. Daniel spoke next, his voice thick with guilt. "Mom, I don't know what to say. You carried all of this on your shoulders for years, and I let her belittle you. I let her call you a maid when you were the backbone of this house." I looked at him then, really looked at him. My son, the boy I had raised, who once used to run to me with scraped knees and tears in his eyes. And now here he was, older, wiser perhaps, finally seeing me not as background noise but as the foundation he'd been standing on his whole life. "It's not about apologies," I said firmly. "It's about respect." Words cut deep. When you called me a maid, when you stood by and let her do it, you erased everything I sacrificed for you. I gave up dreams, time, and energy so you could have a good life. And in return, I was made invisible in my own home. Maria lowered her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. Daniel reached for my hand across the table, his grip tight, desperate. "Please," he said, "don't give up on us. Don't give up on me." I pulled my hand away gently. "It's not me you need to convince. It's yourselves. If you want to keep this house, this life, you need to prove you're worthy of it. Because I've already done my part." For the first time, the silence in that house wasn't heavy with resentment. It was heavy with realization. And I knew the true lesson was only beginning. The final confrontation came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, the bank's notice arrived. A bold red stamp across the envelope screamed, "Final warning." Maria's hands shook as she read it aloud. Daniel's face turned pale. This can't be real," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "We're going to lose everything." I sat calmly on the couch, watching them pace back and forth, panic consuming them. The very same house they once told me I was just a maid in, the home I had built with my own sacrifices, was now slipping through their fingers. "Maybe you should have thought of that," I said softly, "before you decided respect was optional." Daniel dropped to his knees in front of me. His voice cracked, his eyes glassy with desperation. "Mom, please. I was wrong. We were both wrong. We need you. We need your strength, your wisdom. Everything you've given us." For a moment, I let the silence linger, the weight of his words filling the room. Maria sat frozen, her pride shattered beyond repair. She looked at me not as a rival, not as a burden, but as the very anchor of her fragile world. Finally I spoke. "Respect isn't something you beg for when you're drowning. Something you give freely, every day, in every word, in every action. You both forgot that. And that's why you're here now, learning the hard way." Maria sobbed openly, whispering, "I'm sorry. I was blind, selfish. I thought I was above you. But you're stronger than I'll ever be." I stood, looking around the house I had kept alive for decades. This house isn't what matters. What matters is whether you've learned. If you truly understand the value of respect. Daniel grabbed my hand again. "We'll prove it. Please. Just give us one more chance." I took a deep breath, feeling the power shift completely. For years I had been invisible. But now finally I was seen. "Then start by treating me as more than the maid," I said firmly. "Because without me this family and this home will fall apart." The message was clear. And in that moment they both knew. The balance of power had changed forever. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just in the house. I was the house, the foundation, the respect they could no longer afford to deny.